This is too fucking hot. We send it out. Unfortunately, I have no way of knowing. Okay, Dennis. Okay, can you hear me?
I can see you. I can hear you. There is no echo.
Okay,
Looks
good.
like things are straightened out.
All right, excellent. Yeah, I am not sure exactly what happened there, but I thought there was some sort of usually when these things happen, it's because there's a secondary application running at the same time. Okay, good. Give me 1 second here. Okay, so thank you for, please excuse the interruption, folks. Dennis, as I mentioned, for those who are not familiar with Dennis, Dennis is an American ethnopharmacologist, lecturer, and author. He's the brother of well-known psychedelics proponent Terence McKenna and is founding board member and director of ethnopharmacology at the Hefner Research Institute, a nonprofit organization. Dennis received his doctorate in botanical science from the University of British Columbia, where he wrote a dissertation entitled Monoamine Oxidase Inhibitors in Amazonian Hallucinogenic Plants, Ethnobotanical, Phytochemical, and Pharmacological Investigations. Dennis received a postdoctoral research fellowship in the Laboratory of Clinical Pharmacology, National Institute of Health, and the Department of Neurology at Stanford University. Dennis's research led to the development of, to the natural products for the Aveda Corporation, as well as greater awareness of natural products and medicines. He has authored numerous scientific articles and books, and he is co-authored The Invisible Landscape with his brother Terence, and Botanical Medicines, the desk reference for major herbal supplements with Kenneth Jones and Kerry Hughes. In 2012, Dennis wrote his memoir, The Brotherhood of the Screaming Abyss, about him and his brother's journey together. Dennis spent a few years as a senior lecturer for the Center of Spirituality and Healing, part of the American Health Center at the University of Minnesota in Twin Cities. He's now a senior research scientist for the natural health products research at the British Columbia. Products research at the British Columbia Institute of Technology in the Vancouver area. And I believe right now you're running an academy on which we'll be talking very briefly about.
Yes. So thank you, Daniel. I've got, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm sorry for the technical glitches, but that's not my fault, But yeah, I need to get you an updated bio. You're working with something about 10 years old or something. Just to clarify, I don't work for the Natural Health Products Research Group at BCIT in British Columbia. That was from 2006 to 2008. So you can strike that. I don't do that. Everything else that you mentioned, I guess I can plead guilty to. I have done those. I mean, I've worked there, but I don't work there anymore. And yeah, lately my latest endeavor is I founded a nonprofit called the McKenna Academy for Natural Philosophy, and I'll put the URL. It's just McKenna.academy. If people want to look it up, they can see what's going on that website. Anyway, it's a pleasure to be here, and I very much enjoyed the first Psychedelic Film Festival, which I guess was 2 years ago.
Right.
And that was I was actually in New York for that. It was a very different kind of event. I was very pleased to appear with my friend Sarah Hutt. She's as you know, well, she's Daniel's friend, and she brought us together, and we did a presentation together. And her documentary, her short documentary, "The Shaman and the Scientist," got an award, I believe, for the best short documentary, even though it was the Philip K. Dick Film Festival. It had nothing to do with science fiction, but anyway, so it's a pleasure to be back here in these strange circumstances. This is how we live these days.
Sure. I mean, that's really something. I think almost most people would agree that this year's been a really challenging, and it's almost a sense of unreality that comes about. Can you just tell us a little bit about the audience? Because there's some people who might not be familiar with your journey, and I'm sure we could go on for many hours talking about it. But like a very brief synopsis of what you started and over, going back a few years, and what has been your evolution since then?
Okay, I didn't catch all of that. It was a little garbled, but you want me to tell you how I got into this?
Yes. I would say, like, give us like the cliff notes. For
Yeah,
those who are not familiar with your work, not everybody is, about your work for ethnopharmacology, your work with Terrence, and just like a little cliff notes synopsis.
right. Well, it's a kind of a thick cliff notes trying to summarize a whole life
Right.
here, but yes, I've been interested in psychedelics for ever since I was a teenager, and that interest has not flagged over the years. I have to give Terrence credit for he was 4 years older than me, and he led me down the primrose path, I guess you could say, for which I am actually grateful, because psychedelics has been a continuing thread in my life. I've kind of hitched my wagon to it, and I can honestly say that many of the most interesting experiences of my life, besides the actual drug experiences, just life experiences, the places it's taken me, the people that I've met as a result of it, have been very, very gratifying. So I started out in the 60s. Like everybody else, I was fascinated with psychedelics and the counterculture. And over the course of my undergraduate and graduate years, I inclined more and more toward botany and chemistry and the chemistry of plants, and so ethnopharmacology basically is the term, and that's what that's what I continue to do. I mean, maybe the one event that's worth mentioning, I think it was in 2017, and that was before or after the first Philip K. Dick Film Festival. I'm not sure, June 2017, but I organized a conference in the UK called the Ethnopharmacologic Search for Psychoactive Drugs. And it was a 50th anniversary commemoration of the first conference by that name, which was held in San Francisco in 1967. And the book that came out of that was very influential for me at that time. I got my hands on it at age 18 and read it from cover to cover, and then I realized that there is actually science behind this. So that was kind of my rationale for pursuing a career in ethnopharmacology. And I can put the website up here if people are interested in learning about that conference.
Okay.
There you go, espd50.com. Ethnopharmacologic research.
ESP50.com. Okay, got it. I'm doing it
Yeah.
myself.
And if people want to, the website tells you what the conference covered and who presented and so on. And then we published a double volume proceedings of the symposium, one of which was the original 67 reprint, which was a government publication. The U.S. government actually sponsored the first conference, so it's copyright free. And then we did the 2017 volume together as a box set. So people can order that if they want, if they're interested, or they can see the live stream videos from that conference as well. So that's, I mean, I guess that's enough shameless self-promotion here. I'll put in the Synergetic Press is the publisher of that work. And yeah, so
Synergetic Press. Okay, great.
Synergetic Press.
Great, great. I just wrote it down. So, Dennis, what, since the festival, when we did our festival, was it 2 years ago? And by the way, those who are not aware, Dennis is really the inspiration for me organizing the festival. We talked about at the end of the Philip K. Dick, he brought up the ideas. Why don't we do something that is psychedelic? And it kind of struck me as a very obvious thing. It never occurred to me. I mean, I've always been drawn to psychedelic films and live and documentaries, and I said, that's fantastic. It was like staring in the face at me all this time. So I got to thank you, Dennis, for suggesting that and being part of this project. I wanted to ask you, though, in the last couple of years, there's been a real strong interest in taking psychedelics from just being, I guess, something very user-friendly and very user-based to more business. I mean, there's been a lot of talk of IPOs and so forth. And I was wondering, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, on the pros and cons. What are your thoughts on that whole movement that we're going to take? Looking at the way that the decriminalization is taking place in certain states,
right?
Not federally, but what are your thoughts down the line on, because they're looking at the work on psilocybin and MDMA and certainly other substances. So, what's your thought on that?
Well, I mean, it's a complex phenomenon. On the one hand, I think, number one, I think it was inevitable, that this was going to happen. Finally, it's gratifying that those of us who have been researchers in psychedelics for so many years have always looked and hoped for a day like this, when they're finally getting positive attention for their therapeutic uses. This research is emerging through organizations like the Hefter Research Institute, which I'm affiliated with, or MAPS is the other one. They are nonprofits, but they've been directing the resources through private donations for this research because the government will not support it. But there's been enough of an accumulation of research that now there's many peer-reviewed publications that show that psychedelics are useful for a whole spectrum of mental disorders, as well as simply for the exploration of consciousness and spirituality and all of those things. Very well controlled scientific studies. So the FDA, believe it or not, even though it's a government institution, they make most of their decisions based on science. So they've been open to these clinical trials, and they've gone very well. There are several companies that have jumped into this, so it looks like psilocybin, at least. That's pretty much the focus right now. Psilocybin or MDMA. MAPS has kind of taken over MDMA. That most of the work with MDMA to bring it into clinical medicine. MAPS deserves credit for that. And Hefter has focused more or less on psilocybin, and we deserve a lot of the credit for supporting the researchers that did these clinical studies that have brought it to the point where it's now approved, and and will be approved. It's approved for compassionate use, like end of life use and that sort of thing. But it's going to be accepted as a clinical medicine, as something that you can get and use legally. And it's a complex thing because, these compounds have been vilified and prohibited for years, yet they're important elements of indigenous practices, indigenous shamanism and ethno-medicine, if you will. So their value has long been recognized in indigenous cultures. And then along comes world culture and more or less takes these things, as it always has, without giving much back to the indigenous people that have been the stewards of not only the knowledge of how to use them, but actually the habitats and the plants and fungi themselves. They've been more or less the stewards of these things. Now the rest of the world is waking up to how important these are, and inevitably in capitalist societies, you get companies that see an investment opportunity, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think that you have to do this if these compounds are going to be integrated into medicine. But on the other hand, there's never been a medicine like this that's found. This is not just another cancer drug or heart drug or something like that. This is actually, these compounds are sacred in many cultures, and they're at the center of spiritual practices, and they are arguably the intellectual property or the intellectual legacy, anyway, of indigenous cultures. So I think that the companies that want to capitalize on it and make a ton of money also have an obligation to give something back.
Right.
For a change, let's let the indigenous people have a place at the table. They've freely shared their knowledge, and what they haven't shared, we've co-opted anyway. But they deserve to be recognized, and there needs to be some reciprocity there. And hopefully that will happen. Some of these organizations are running as nonprofits, and they're okay with this idea that there should be reciprocity. I just don't want to see the capitalist for-profit companies. I think they have to acknowledge that this is something special, and there should be some reciprocity. And the other thing is, if these compounds are going to be integrated into medicine, you have to completely change medicine. You have to change the therapeutic paradigms, because these are not compounds that you say, take 2 and call me in the morning.
Right.
It doesn't work like that. They require the important element of psychedelic therapy is the therapists and the services, the support that's provided. That's as much as important as the compound itself, because the compounds have to be used in appropriate context with therapeutic support, to help people. These compounds, especially psilocybin, they produce profound experiences that can be quite unsettling if you're not prepared, and if you don't do it in the right context. And so that's the whole idea of setting up, what Leary and Alpert and all those old guys were talking about back in the 60s, which is set and setting. Those are the variables that you bring to the psychedelic experience, besides the other ones being the dose and whatever the medicine is. But you have to have an appropriate setting so that the therapeutic process can play out, in a safe place with a qualified therapist, who may not do much during the setting except that to sit with the person, but may play a very important role to prepare them for it and help them integrate it afterwards. Those are very important aspects. You can have a profound psychedelic experience, and if you don't do anything with the insights, with the realization, then the therapeutic effect won't last. So as you look at this commercialization of psychedelics, I mean, I think where the profit uh, lies, the revenue model is in the services that are provided, not the medicine. That's another thing that makes these different than most medicines. Big pharma wants to make drugs that you take 4 times a day for the rest of your life. These medicines you take maybe 2 or 3 times in a lifetime, if you get the right therapeutic effect. I mean, some of us are slow learners. Some of us, like me, we keep taking these things. But for many people who take them for therapeutic uses, that's what makes them different than the usual, psychopharmaceuticals like antidepressants and so on. These actually get to the root of the problem and can help people get insights into their depression or their trauma or their addiction or whatever it might be, and actually get cured, actually resolve their issues rather than just paper them over, which is what most of the psychopharmaceuticals do. They don't really cure the situation. They just kind of numb you to the situation, make it less tolerable or more tolerable. I mean, these work in a very different way. They work on the psychological level and the neurological level, and they can actually, there's emerging evidence that, you can trace certain behavioral problems, certain mental disorders, and so on, to a neurological source. Say, something's wrong with your circuitry, basically, in some ways. These can actually fix that circuitry. There's now emerging evidence that they can change the connectivity of the neural systems in the brain. They can actually repair the brain to a certain extent and make it work better. And on the behavioral level, what that often is reflected by is essentially it's a kind of a reset on the behavioral level. It's kind of it's a profoundly impactful experience, but it's literally like rebooting your computer. And when you reboot your computer, the reason you have to reboot it is that the kludge builds up and it doesn't work so well. And when you reboot it, it gets rid of all that. It's very, very similar to on the level of neurology. I think that's what psychedelics do. In the brain, they actually reset primarily your serotonin system, which is the neurotransmitter that it works on. What SSRIs also work on serotonin. They interfere with the reuptake of serotonin. But serotonin is such an important neurotransmitter that it regulates many aspects of experience, from consciousness, from perception, from our eating behavior, sexual behavior, all of that. Serotonin is kind of the master neurotransmitter. Sometimes you just need to hit that sucker with a big reset, and it's like being reborn in a certain way. It's by at least like rebooting your computer. I suppose if you did that to your computer and your computer could think, it would think it was reborn. So people have this kind of experience, that it's incredibly renewing for them. And so I think these are potentially the most valuable medicines to come into psychiatry in many, many decades. The irony is that they've always been around. There's nothing new about psychedelics. We have, a history of thousands of years of using these things. It's taken science and medicine, as we think of it, this long to catch up and begin to, kind of acknowledge that, yeah, these are potentially very valuable, but because of this sensitivity of just by their nature, their origins in indigenous knowledge and their checkered past in our culture and all that, it's going to take exceptional wisdom and insight to bring these things into medicine in a way that's both, that's beneficial for the people that use them, beneficial for the people that have been the stewards of them, and and ethical, basically, because there's all sorts of temptations, especially when people are, different companies are raising hundreds of millions of dollars. Then obviously that's a minefield in a certain way, and it needs exceptionally wise and ethical people to bring this into medicine in the right way.
In your book, I've actually been rereading DMT Dialogues, and in your the chapter, you seem to lean more towards ayahuasca and the use of ayahuasca versus those who prefer DMT, simply because there's a longer the whole process of ayahuasca and the integration seems to be a little bit longer, allows the conscious mindset to sort of integrate, whereas the DMT seems like too fast, too quick, and it's not. And the user often is astonished to what he just experienced.
Right.
Other than that, that's what. Whereas in ayahuasca, so.
Well, I don't dismiss the DMT experience. I mean, it was DMT that got my brother and I really interested in psychedelics back in the day. I mean, we were, it seemed, we were familiar with LSD. That's what there was, and that's what was around. But DMT seemed like a whole other order of magnitude of strangeness, and when we've always been attracted to the strange, so it was our thing, and I think DMT is, if you're into psychedelics, you pretty much have to put it on your map, just so you have that data point. But the thing is, it is very short. So there's not, if you smoke it or inject it, I don't think most people inject it, but you could, if you have the right purity, but you can smoke it and get the same effects. But the effects are maybe 20 minutes, maybe half an hour at the outside, unless you try to lengthen it by pre-dosing with MAO inhibitors. So 20 minutes is not that long to spend in the space and really get to know what it's about. You sort of come back with this impression that something incredible and amazing has happened. But beyond that, there's not a lot that you can bring back to integrate. And the advantage of ayahuasca is that it stretches that period out from 20 minutes to 6 or 7 hours. And what happens when you do that is the intensity is usually lower, although ayahuasca can get very intense. But the intensity is lower, but the content is richer, in a sense, because you can more explore what's being revealed to you. It's not like this roller coaster ride through this psychedelic amusement park. It's more like a little slower, like taking a boat instead of a roller coaster, and you move through these dimensions, and you have a better opportunity to really see what's happening, to to really appreciate what is going on and reflect on it and so on. So therapeutically, I think ayahuasca is better. Now, there are companies that are working with DMT and 5-methoxy DMT. They're trying to develop ways to, prolong the experience, either by giving it in an intravenous catheter with a continuous IV drip, you can stay in that dimension for a while longer. They're doing things like that. My question is, is that useful? Is that really necessary? Because compounds like psilocybin or its active form, psilocybin is converted to psilocin in the body, right? Psilocin and DMT are very, very close chemically. Psilocybin is 4-hydroxy DMT. That simple molecular difference makes it orally active, right? Which DMT itself is not orally active. That's why you have to if you want to render it orally active, then ayahuasca is the way to do that, because the other component of ayahuasca, the vine, it's made from 2 plants. One contains DMT. The other one is a vine, a big jungle liana, and the bark of that contains these monoamine oxidase inhibitors. And monoamine oxidase is the enzyme that will degrade DMT. If you eat DMT, the enzymes in your stomach will break it down before it's ever absorbed. That's why you have to smoke it unless you have an MAO inhibitor. So ayahuasca is a way to make it orally active. And when it's orally active, the time frame, the time course is much longer. So there's a chance to really grapple with some of the things that might come up, and that's important. You need to have enough time in that altered state for these things that may be issues related to whatever, for you to actually experience that, reflect on it, and deal with it. DMT is like the trailer in some ways. It lets you poke your head through into this other dimension, and you're looking around and it's all very chaotic and it's amazing and so on. And there are apparently, for many people, there are entities sensed there that are telling you things. They're very invested in making you pay attention and so on. And but it's literally like poking your head into a hyperspatial amusement park or something. And then you get to look around, but then you come to a point where, okay, the trailer's over, and then you come back. So I don't think I don't think that. I mean, I think that DMT and 5-MeO DMT have the potential, but in some ways, I wonder what's wrong with something like psilocybin or ayahuasca. You can also make synthetic versions of ayahuasca that are, and they're called pharmahuasca, where you basically combine DMT with the pure alkaloids from the vine, the beta carbolines, and that's an orally active preparation. Although it is definitely an active preparation, that synthetic analog, but it's also different than ayahuasca, because ayahuasca has a lot of effects on the mind-body system that pharmahuasca does not. And most people's idea of a good time is not to throw up necessarily, and you often do with ayahuasca, but that's actually in some ways part of the therapeutic spectrum of what it does. Throwing up in traditional societies is viewed as cleansing, and the idea is a good purge purges the mind as well. You vomit up the toxins that poison the body and potentially the demons that poison your mind. So throwing up is a cathartic experience. I do not view that as as an undesirable side effect of ayahuasca. I view it as a desirable side effect of ayahuasca. And maybe I'm just strange, but I think there are a lot of ayahuasca enthusiasts that would agree that the purging is part of this therapeutic effect because it's catharsis, right? It's basically a catharsis. So that's
What there's been a resurgence or an increase in the whole ayahuasca industry, and so do you know of or can you recommend or at least point those who are interested to reputable, because there are certainly some shops that have opened up in Peru and Brazil that claim, and the
yeah.
results haven't been so positive. So, is there any way for the viewer to explore on his own as to what qualities rather should they be looking for when they explore an ayahuasca retreat?
That's a very good question because the quality varies, and there are places where they run very good programs. They look after you. There's not a lot of shenanigans and going on, and they're run by reputable people, who really care about their clients. Others are not so well organized, and obviously in some cases they're organized by people who really don't have your best interests at heart. I mean, anytime you get a situation like ayahuasca retreat, it could be any other kind of retreat, yoga retreat or whatever, but anytime you're dealing with kind of powerful spiritual energies, there is often you know it's an invitation to, I guess, egomaniacs or power hungry people to take advantage of that and use that to get people in vulnerable states, and then either sexual abuse or other kinds of abuse often happens. But that said, I think it's important to recognize that that's not, that it happens. I think it's fairly rare, but it definitely happens. There's no reliable way to. There's no like quality control website. There are some websites that rate these different retreat centers, but the best thing to do is go through trusted networks of friends. People that have been to these places that can vouch for them. It takes a little longer, but
Right.
yeah, you should be very careful about signing up for a retreat center. Make sure that that it has a good reputation, and do some research, talk to some people that have been there. Just do your homework, basically, because this is an important thing that may affect the rest of your life. So you don't want to go to on the internet and click on the first retreat center that comes up. Well, you may, but you don't want to make a quick decision about these retreats. So yeah, you have to be careful. And of course, now at this time, there is not really, you can't find these places in North America,
Right.
that are operating legally. There are places that are operating under the radar that you can find out about, and some of them are very well run. And hopefully the decrim movements that are happening, things like psilocybin, will lead to a situation where a lot of these retreat centers that are operating under the radar can operate in the open and in a legal framework, do it legally. And I think that's ultimately a good thing, because right now people's options are basically to go to South America or Mexico or someplace else to have these retreats. And although you can do that, that has, sometimes have adverse impacts on the local communities. It's a two-edged sword. It can be beneficial and it can be damaging in some ways. But if centers in North America could start operating that way, then you could bring the medicine from South America rather than the people to South America. And I think we'd be better off all round if that were the model. There are places in Canada now where people are beginning to offer that kind of therapy. Canada's always been a little bit further ahead than the States in terms of the regulation of these things, the ethical regulation and maintaining access. For example, Health Canada has approved the use of psilocybin in end of life patients under what's called Section 56. It's a special exemption, gives people access to an unapproved medicine, and they've approved I think about 50 people with terminal illnesses to take psilocybin or take psilocybin mushrooms under the supervision of a therapist. So Canada's very open to this, and that's going to continue. And that's a good model for the States. I think that if you could have these psychedelic therapy centers in communities around the country, I think it would do a tremendous amount to help basically mental health on the collective level, on the community level, as well as the individuals that need the help. Because these things are, in these societies, indigenous societies, these things are regarded as essentially teachers. They help us become better people and relate to other people in a better way. So it's not, you don't have to be sick to benefit from a psychedelic. You don't have to be ill. You can use them for spiritual development and learning. Who of us is perfect, right? I mean, we may not be sick, but we're not perfect. But psychedelics can help us become better, wiser, more thoughtful people, and that's kind of the point of the whole thing. We seek happiness, right? And people inherently seek meaningful experiences, and they're not getting meaningful experiences from organized religion anymore. I mean, I suppose some do, but most people, many people, are disillusioned with organized religion because they don't really provide any spiritual satisfaction. They become rote. They become, if anything, bludgeons to regulate behavior, but they don't provide an actual spiritual experience. So people see that they're hollowed out in some ways, and people reach out for psychedelic experiences because they want something genuine. And the research that Roland Griffiths at Johns Hopkins and other people have done with psilocybin have shown, they investigated psilocybin end of life people. What's that? Do you hear a roar? Okay, well, it's gone away. Anyway, and in their subject, these were people, naive to psychedelics, who took it under these carefully controlled conditions, and in the initial study, which was really, there have been many since, but in the initial study, these were people with end-of-life anxiety, terminal patients, end-of-life anxiety, and 60% of the cohort reported that their psilocybin experience was the most meaningful experience of their lives, and others. Am I making that noise? Maybe it's me.
Yeah, I don't hear anything on my end.
Well, maybe I'm touching the computer. I'll try not to touch the computer.
Right.
Anyway, that it was, being scientists, they don't want to use the term spiritual experience or mystical experience or anything. So they sort of substitute this kind of anemic term, a personally meaningful experience. That's okay if they can help you have the most personally meaningful experience of your life. That's a huge thing.
Right.
Because this is what's lacking. I think this is why people feel so much despair and depression and fear and all of the things that are very much permeate our culture right now. I think underneath all that is profound anxiety. That really nothing does matter. That we're fucked basically. And and I think, we may be, but I think that despair is not a helpful, but it's hard not to be sometimes. So psychedelics may be part of the answer to that.
What is your what do you think is the role? I mean, in many Eastern traditions, there's been a talk of meditation on the third eye, and now it's associated with the pineal gland. But I understand that DMT is produced everywhere in our body, not just in the pineal. So, in your opinion, what is the role? What do you think the role is? And does it justify the merit? Does it justify this attribute that this is where the visions come from focusing on the third eye, or does it have to do with the DMT drip that may be taking place?
Yeah. So the pineal gland has this sort of mythical aura about it, the third eye and all that, and we know that it does produce DMT under some circumstances, but
Right.
now and so it's been thought that perhaps in states of high stress or challenges like dying, for instance, that the pineal will produce DMT and induce the near-death experience. But that's really that's changed, and what's changed is more recent research that shows that, number one, that the pineal could not possibly produce enough DMT to have a psychotropic effect. And the other thing is, it turns out there's DMT all over the brain
Right.
at levels comparable to other neurotransmitters such as serotonin and dopamine. So now it's just another one of these neurotransmitters. When it's produced and what its effects are hard to say. This is what needs to be explored because we know that it's a psychedelic if you take it in your body. What does it do? What does this novel neurotransmitter system do under so-called normal circumstances? And it may be that it has to do with the regulation of our focus on inner states versus outer states. It may have some role in that regard. But this is actually the frontier. This is what needs to be looked at more thoroughly. Is exactly this. And actually, there's a gentleman called John Chavez who's done a lot of work on this, and he's not a neuroscientist himself, but he may as well. He's a self-taught neuroscientist. His website is dmtquest.com, I think it is. Maybe it's .org, but I don't think so. But take a look at that website because it has a lot of information about physiological states in which the endogenous production of DMT is likely to be boosted. And he links a lot of this to like extreme sports, like the Wim Hof method and so on. And under certain circumstances, these are basically putting your body under states of stress. And one of the responses may be to boost the level of DMT. It certainly changes your, your EEG patterns,
Right.
which again would be another indication that it's, that it is having an effect on the neurotransmitter system. But there's a lot of work that still needs to be done on this, and this new information, I think, is pointing in a direction for, we have had this fetishistic fascination with the pineal for too long, and I think we've been missing the point. Excuse me. Sorry.
Sure.
Sorry about that.
That's
So that's
yes.
yeah. So
Yeah. Well, that's. I have a question from one of our. I guess one of our viewers is. It may have to do with what we were talking about. They want to know what are your thoughts on. Is the use of psychedelics and evolutionary concepts of ascension and a form of immortality, and if you've done any personal research in that for yourself.
could you run that by me again?
Sure. The question is, can you speak to the use of psychedelics and evolutionary concepts of ascension and a form of immortality?
Well, I don't know about immortality, but I think psychedelics have evolutionary consequences and played a role in the evolution of consciousness. In fact, interesting you should mention this, because my brother's book, Food of the Gods, was published in 1993, and that was basically the thesis of it, was that we've had relationship with these mushrooms. We evolved in the same environment that they did in the Pleistocene, which goes back about 2.5 million years ago, the beginning of the Pleistocene, up to the present. And he made the case that, hominids, the ancestors of humans, evolved in this environment where mushrooms were present, and that played a role in the emergence of consciousness. And of course, it was completely denounced and dismissed and ridiculed. And what came out of it was, what's often called the stoned ape theory. But it's interesting that since the book was published in 1993, there's been new data that's come forth to actually make this idea, which seems kind of implausible on the surface, makes it actually gone from, well, maybe so, but to actually probably so. And Terrence's book is being reissued. It has been reissued in a new edition. I think it's Bantam UK publishers, Penguin Books. If you go on and look, Food of the Gods, second edition, it's come out, and I was invited to write the foreword to the new edition. So in process of doing that, I did some research, and we're actually going to do a podcast on the new edition with myself and Paul Stamets, who is well known as kind of Mr. Mushroom to people in the psychedelic world. So he and I are going to discuss this, because Paul is, not only is he good friend, but he's also a person that was receptive to this idea of the stoned ape. And we're going to talk about that idea and what's changed, what new information has emerged to make it not such a crazy idea after all. Things that we've learned about what these things do, their ability to reorganize neural architecture.
And sure, And certainly we've seen books, traditions rather, going back to the Soma or the various mystery traditions where they refer to some substances that presumably allow the user to enter an altered state of consciousness. So that's been going on for some time as well. So Dennis, tell us a little bit about your academy and what the work you're doing now, or is there something you want to share with?
Okay, well, yeah, the McKenna Academy. It's a nonprofit that I founded when I moved to Canada, and then I actually set it up in Canada initially, but now I've reincorporated it in the States as a 501c3. Even though I live in Canada, you can do that. Most of my colleagues live in the States. It's basically as the name implied, it's a learning space. It's a place where, in the spirit of Eleusis, basically, I think I call it a modern mystery school, similar to Eleusis, the first psychedelic university in 1500 years. So a lot of our focus is on plant medicines, obviously, psychedelic medicines, but also a little broader than that. I mean, it's a place for inquiry and learning about natural philosophy. And natural philosophy is, I think, natural philosophy is what science used to be before it became reductionist and quantitative and dismissed anything that was not. I think science made a big sacrifice of certain things by narrowing its worldview this way. I think natural philosophy acknowledges that there are other ways of knowing, and they should also be acknowledged. You can look at the McKenna Academy and see what it's about. When we first started out, we wanted a big part of our mission, or how we would deliver the message, would be through conferences and retreats, mostly in South America, which we'd already been doing. So it kind of built on what we were doing. Then we formed the academy and assumed that would go ahead. And then COVID came along and changed everybody's plans. So now we're trying to develop an online presence, and people can look at events that we've staged and so on the website. We hope to get back to doing physical conferences, whenever we can. But right now, we're just doing virtual. So we've started a podcast, or we will be starting a podcast series, and so on. So
and for those who want to know more about your academy, what is the website they should go to?
Just go to www.mckenna.academy. Academy is the suffix. I don't seem to be able to put this in a chat. I can't see the. I can put it here. And
so it's www.mckenna.academy.
Right.
That's academy with a C, right?
That's right.
.org or
No. Academy is the suffix.
Okay. Great.
Yeah, academy. It's not .org. It's
right. So it's www.mckenna.academy. Great. All right. I'm just entering here in the chat here.
Yeah. So I'm going to have to sign off.
So absolutely. Well, Dennis, thank you again for sharing an update, and we hope to see more of you and the McKenna Academy. I think that's fantastic that you're doing rebirthing the Eleusis Academy, or the Eleusis Mystery School, because that's something we all need more of, especially in this day and age.
That's what we're trying to do. Yeah, exactly.
Fantastic.
All my best for the success of the festival, and I'll check in later on a few of the showings, and look forward to the next time, Daniel.
Absolutely, Dennis, and hopefully we'll meet live one day in the future, not too far away.
Let's hope so.
Let's.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Well, folks, there you have it, Dennis. The festival continues, and for those who are not who just signed in, you can just go to our Psychedelic Film Festival, Psychedelic Film and Music Festival.com, and we're having plenty of shows and movies, features. So hope to see you there. Bye bye.